All right, perfect. Thank you so much. Hi, good morning, everyone. I hope that everyone is having an amazing morning. And I just want to thank you for attending our session, which is how to hire as a startup founder and particularly best leverage diversity. My name is Sonya Fox, and I'm your moderator for today's session. And as far as myself, I'm an HR thought partner who serves as founder of Vurde, a quarterly self-care package subscription service.
I'm sorry, Sonya. Could you unmute yourself? I apologize.
You're still muted, Sonya.
All right, looks like she's gonna come back, but I guess we can go ahead and just start talking. We're excited to have you all. I'm Jen, I'm one of the panelists. I'm cutting off Sonya's very awesome intros that she's prepared for us, but I hope y'all are excited to be here and learn about diversity and hiring.
Hi, everyone.
It's back.
Hi. Can you guys hear and see me now? Greatly apologize for that. And now I can actually see all of you guys. So I think something was going on my end. But again, I just really appreciate one. I think I heard Jen, you guys kind of holding down the fort as I transition. So again, without further ado, I just want to say thank you guys so much for being a part of today's session on how to hire as a startup founder and best leverage diversity. My name is Sonya Fox, and I'm the moderator for today's session. As far as myself, I'm an HR thought partner who serves as the founder of Vurde, a quarterly self-care package subscription service connecting employees to food, culture, and well-being. And I also most recently served as an HR director in both the government and nonprofit sectors. And so this topic particularly is really near and dear to my heart. But first, before we begin, I want to just take a moment to acknowledge Amazon AWS, who is the sponsor for this session. Thank you for contributing to our session and also to StartOut's first annual Equity Summit. So, first, before we also get started, just want to additionally highlight today's agenda and a number of housekeeping rules as we get started. So today's session, it will consist of us directly hearing from our panelists for the first 25 minutes, followed by a Q&A session for the next 15. So everyone, please jot down your questions along the way so that you can share them during the Q&A time. And then also we'll transition before the 15-minute break that is taking place at 12:15. In terms of housekeeping rules, I want you to know this is a safe space. So I want you to speak freely, know you can speak authentically, but also be respectful. In addition, also want you to be mindful, as you guys saw, try to stay muted, if you're not speaking. However, later in the Q&A session, you'll have an opportunity to unmute yourself if you're looking to ask a question of our panelists. And then lastly, with our Q&A session, there's a raise hand feature in MS Teams. And so that is how you're going to indicate that you'd like to ask a question. You'll simply press it, raise your hand, and then once we get to that session, we'll go through and call on everyone. So jumping right into today's session, I'm so excited to be joined by just two dynamic panelists. Our panelists today are single-handedly amplifying diversity and inclusion within the workplace, specifically within the startup ecosystem. And so I'll start first with Jennifer Kim. Jennifer Kim is a startup advisor and diversity inclusion strategist for top startups in Silicon Valley. Previously serving as the head of Lever, a startup known for its achievement in the diversity and inclusion space. Jen runs Inclusion at Work, and she also runs an advice column in the D&I space, providing resources for startups. And she also has a startup boot camp. So the boot camp in particular is a course that teaches companies exactly how to hire and get hiring right from the start, which, trust me, you want to make sure that you get hiring right from the start. Our next panelist is Shari Holly, who is the Director of Operations for Pipelines. Shari oversees operations development of the Pipelines mobile app and the Pipelines Foundation, having been involved when Pipelines was just an idea. Pipelines is a mobile app that connects underrepresented talent to career and training opportunities in tech, entertainment, and creative industries. And also it helps provide just a vast pool of these qualified, diverse talents. Prior to Pipelines, Shari was the program administrator for the first commercial directors diversity program, created and endorsed by the Association of Independent Commercial Producers and the Directors Guild of America. Shari considers herself a change maker and is committed both personally and professionally to pipelining more underrepresented talent into the entertainment field. And so I'm going to go ahead and just get started. Diversity is a word that people often refer to reference differences in racial constructs. And so, however, many of us, really do know that that's just a one-dimensional view of diversity, and it's not really the reality. And so, especially as many of us represent the LGBTQ plus community. So taking this into account, Shari, what is diversity and what does it mean to you?
Diversity. Can you hear me? Perfect. I thank you so much for everyone being here. I'm honored to be a part of this session. But when I think of the word diversity, it's a term that I personally feel has been is left to interpretation nowadays because we use it so much. It can become really diluted and people get really confused as to what it really means. But I'm just going to break it down to one word: representation. That is what diversity is. Representation. When you think about what our world looks like, or our economy or our society looks like, are all marginalized groups represented? Do we have women, POC, LGBTQ+, economic diversity? So when you think of diversity, I think the most simple way to put it is representation. And I'm just going to leave it at that.
I absolutely love that. And it really is so encompassing. And Jen, I mean, for you, what does diversity mean to you?
Yeah, I think we can kind of break this into two different definitions. So there's kind of the academic definition, and that is very much where representation comes from. We're talking about groups of people, and within those groups of people, does differences exist? So colloquially, we often refer to kind of demographic diversity most visible aspects of diversity, which include, gender, race, but it really encompasses all kinds of aspects. So whether that's disability status, LGBTQ, socioeconomic background, we can kind of go on and on. But I also think, in addition to the academic definition, which is important for us to get on the same page, there's also kind of what's happening in, practico. So I think diversity, equity, and inclusion, which we'll kind of go into a little bit later in the panel, I believe. It's becoming we're using it as a shorthand for a practice to company building, to building, best teams and products and services, really trying to ensure that you're building the best company possible in this incredibly connected, globalized world. I think often I think I'll kind of call it out straight from the beginning. Diversity has kind of been thrust into the mainstream very recently, whether it was Me Too in the last couple of years or obviously this past summer. Unless you've been living under a rock, I know you've heard about, the killing of George Floyd, the spark of protest that kind of really started renew the movement. And to me, what's really interesting is that it's brought kind of a new sense of very welcome urgency to the conversation. So more and more, we're finding that startup founders, leaders like yourselves are taking this a lot more seriously and wanting to learn and engage with this topic because to me, it's such a clear way of building a healthy team, being a great leader for the future. Diversity is often sometimes kind of associated with like this PR disaster or, very real, very real tragedy. But I also think diversity is actually kind of the unsung hero of innovation, of collaboration, great results that we just don't quite connect the dots as easily. But yeah, you show me a strong team and I guarantee you diversity exists. You show me like a strong leader, I guarantee you they are coming from like a some kind of background where they were tested and they felt excluded and they've channeled that to become even stronger. So yeah, we can go on and on and on, but I hope that kind of serves as like a nice little setting the stage for all of us.
Thank you so much. And definitely just seeing from the chats, it looks as if a lot of people really agree with the two of you in terms of diversity being representative of representation. And then also, Jen, particularly to your point, it really is the secret sauce to, to really highly effective teams and organizations. And so that's something that I'm super excited that you amplified, and I hope is amplified throughout this entire Equity Summit. So, Shari, as a founding member and director of operations for Pipelines, can you share with the audience how you have intentionally leveraged diversity?
Yes, and I love the word that you used, intentionally, because that's so important, and I'll get into that later. But like she said before, Pipelines is really a tool, a radical tool, if you can't tell. We wanted to address the D&I issue for talent and companies in a way that's radical, effective, and not political. We don't care about awards or politics or anything like that, because obviously we're in 2020 still having the same conversation, and if we don't hold ourselves accountable and really take real action, we'll be here in 2050 having the same conversation. So we wanted to put our heads together and figure out both on the talent side and the company side. I think it's important for us to understand both sides when you have so many organizations that are hyper-focused on companies, organization, which is important. But I think we also have to have that level of empathy and understanding where the talent and the barrier of entry for talent is coming from. So we wanted to create a tool that will address both of that. So we're intentionally leveraging diversity because we are understanding the barrier of entry for talent, particularly for communities of color, as an access and opportunity situation. It really boils down to that. They have limited or no access at all to these industries, no resources, no programs, mentors, role models. It's a home thing. We could go on and on. But then also you have companies who are still viewing underrepresented talent, hiring them as a risk. And we really need to change that perspective and change the way we talk about hiring underrepresented talent, because as Jennifer and you put so eloquently, it is an asset. It's a proven asset to have diverse teams and have underrepresented talent at your companies and organizations. So Pipelines is doing that because we're challenging companies to perform a cultural reset and truly hold themselves accountable. So we are not a plug and play, check a box, safe result organization. If you decide to partner with us, we're going to hold you accountable. We're going to have that courageous and uncomfortable dialogue to feel to explore how we can help you reach your DEI goals in a way that is efficient and effective. And we're going to assess what your challenges are. What have you been doing in the past that's not working, and how can we revamp that and change that so we can really start to not only pipeline underrepresented talent through the door, but keep them there, because that's when the whole inclusion piece comes in, which we'll talk to later. And then also, talent, underrepresented talent is really feeling debilitated. And it starts really, really early. We start in high school and up, and we did that intentionally because we can talk all day about leadership, and the pipeline problem at the top, which is equally as important. But we really need to go back and figure out why we aren't seeing more POC or women or LGBTQ plus at the top. And that's really starting in high school, even earlier, if you wanna be honest. But we wanna start in high school because we wanna get them before they reach the real world and before they reach the workforce, to inspire and empower them to pursue these industries, so they'll be more apt to pursue them after they graduate. So we're really doing, I always joke we have a 17-prong mission, but we're really, really hyper-focused on how do we support and challenge and hold the companies accountable, and how do we create a non-intimidating, feasible, effective tool for talent to connect directly to these industries that doesn't feel like, that they can't see themselves, that feels attainable, and that we create more meaningful opportunities for them to see people who look like them in these industries.
Thank you so much for that. And I really like, particularly you amplified, again, it really does start, even before going, particularly college or any type of, post-secondary schooling. And, a lot of our youth understanding and knowing that these career pathways exist, and that's really, really key. And again, similarly, Jen, just as the former head of people for Lever, a company that's really been seen as a leader in diversity and inclusion efforts, really to me has revolutionized in many ways, like applicant tracking systems. That's my HR nerd hat on. But can you just share, how did you advise them and just other startups on how they can best leverage diversity and it really be that secret sauce for them?
Yeah, and I think that's why I'm excited to especially talk about this topic with this audience. A lot of you that are either thinking about building a startup or starting to, because we learned a lot of lessons at Lever. So I'll give some context. I actually had joined as employee number 6 as the first female employee to what was actually a very typical startup. At the time, it was entirely white and Asian and almost entirely male. And we got to start a lot of conversations. So I came from a nonprofit education background. So when I walked into a room like this, it was a lot of, like, oh, is this normal? So I remember asking the software engineers, like, is this normal? And they would kind of look at me like blankly, like, what are you talking about? Because for a lot of these, white men from STEM backgrounds, they were so used to such homogeneous backgrounds. And we got to, and I'll go into detail throughout the answers here, but we got to really impart kind of this like grassroots, authenticity focused strategy that led to real results. So 3 years later, 100 employees later, we became a 50-50 men and women gender balance, including non-binary folks. We had very significant representation of LGBTQ, Black and Latinx, parents and caregivers, to the point that people would walk into our office and be like, I've never seen this many Black people in a large startup before. So back to your, so that was kind of the context. Back to your question, how I'm advising how I was advising Lever and kind of the companies that I work with now. And I think the one idea that I really want to impart here is that effective diversity, equity, and inclusion at the startup stage is very different than what corporate DEI looks like. So I'm guessing, correct me if I'm wrong, none of you have the budgets of, Google's diversity efforts, which, by the way, is literally in the hundreds of billions of dollars. So there's this kind of sense that because of the urgency, because of the importance, we look to leaders, right? Like, oh, what company is doing this, right? Like, I wonder who I can learn from. And the honest answer is there are very few role models, because this is an area that I don't know if anyone's super confident in, like, oh, we have done it perfectly. I didn't like saying that, Lever. The nature of progress means we're always improving, and there's a lot of work to be done here. When we're talking about, trying to dismantle systems of oppression that have been in place for literally hundreds of years. So all that to say, startups actually have an advantage in not just copying what Google and Facebook are doing, which is, very high, like PR friendly, very flashy, expensive, like just capital intensive efforts, But instead, what you can do is really start from the ground up to think about integrating DEI from your very early days. I don't think we're expecting anything, like crazy, like you have to be thinking about, DEI 24/7 because you're like, well, I'm trying to build a company and survive every day. Like, yes. But just starting early and really focusing on what makes for a greater impact and not just what looks good is what helps. I can just give some examples around, when I talk to startups, there's a lot of like, yeah, we're really trying to hire, a lot more underrepresented people. So we got to sponsor, this like this 2-day conference that's, geared towards candidates for underrepresented groups. And we paid like $80,000 for it. And I'll be like, oh no, don't do that. um, Instead, what I would have you do is not these kind of like fleeting one-time efforts, but really look at the effective DEI strategy for startups. It's about let's take the existing resources and advantages you have as an early team. What that means is I bet that, if you're 5 people, your employees are the co-creators of your culture with you in a way that the average Google employee just like doesn't really care, nor do they have the ability to influence and shape the needle on the culture, but your team does. So it's all about how having hard, kind of like what the other presenters were saying a second ago, having hard conversations, being able to talk about what are some areas we want to build differently. What are some conversations we need to have, whether that's about our hiring practices or our blind spots when we're building product, how we interact with customers. I also, recommend a lot of kind of like team bonding activities that have an emphasis on diversity and inclusion. So this is like a kind of a small tip, but literally just making DEI into the everyday. Maybe you can do a book club. Maybe you can do a movie night that has a focus on diversity. You have to get people comfortable with diversity and talking about it. A lot of people can't even say like the word black at work or gay at work without being like, oh, am I doing the right thing? If that's the stage that your team is at, how in the world are we actually going to talk about hard things when it comes to hiring or product? So I think before you become really large, you have an opportunity to integrate DEI into the everyday conversation, welcome people who might not have a lot of experience in it, admit that you're all learning together. But for you as leaders, have the opportunity to create those spaces and welcome people in. I hope that makes sense.
No, it really did. You said so many good gems that actually, just the two of you guys, and particularly, it really leads to my next question. And I think you did hint to it, Jen. Just again, tangible things on how startup founders can advance diversity when establishing and growing their teams. And so I know you stated again, the founding team, you are the co-creators of culture. And so again, just to kind of make sure everyone caught it, again, how can startup founders advance diversity when they're establishing and growing their teams?
Yeah, so this is where I'm going to continue my maybe like rant against you can't just what copy Google and Facebook are doing. So often what we see is kind of chasing just recruiting kind of on a singular level and trying to change our representation numbers. So I think there's a common misunderstanding here that diversity itself is like, oh, we need to increase like, this number from this percentage representation. And I actually see diversity is a result of really great recruiting and people ops practices. So I'm going to say it again. So diversity is actually a result of great hiring and great people ops practices. All of you as company leaders, whether you're coming from a more technical background or you're more on the sales and growth marketing side, all of you also have a kind of this like third responsibility of building a company, which is building the organization, right? That is a skill. That is something that we all have to learn because I'm guessing y'all weren't born as babies knowing how to hire well. If you were, please talk to me. So what I mean by that is if we are being intentional about the way we hire, the way we manage culture, that means we can truly build a meritocratic system in which people from all kinds of backgrounds, no matter kind of like different demographic differences, can be successful, and they're set up for success, and they can contribute to your culture. That's not how it works in our real world, which there people from underrepresented groups, people from marginalized groups, have very much real barriers. There are systemic barriers in place that prevent people who would be doing well not having the same opportunities. So if we have kind of like an established company already, and we keep looking at, oh, we just need to bring more diversity, we just need to hire more, more women, more people of color, blah, 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 without actually changing anything that you're doing internally, that effort is going to be wasted, right? You're just kind of filling the pipeline, but it'll be just as leaky. And I've actually heard from working with companies and hearing some horror stories. There are companies out there who have literally spent, millions of dollars to increase some kind of like, minority hiring or some diversity, hiring, only to find out the same number, if not higher, were leaving. So it actually wasn't moving the needle at all. So instead, where you have an opportunity as startup founders, as you're building your organization, your culture, your team from scratch, is to make sure that people from underrepresented backgrounds have a work environment that they feel both welcomed and set up for success in. So it's a little bit of kind of counterintuitive maybe, where you're like, okay, I care about diversity, so I want to hire more people from underrepresented backgrounds. But it's more like, I care about diversity, so I have to get my, stuff together in organizational kind of like operations, and that also leads to diversity, right? It's a little bit of a indirect effort, but it's truly what makes for a sustainable strategy that actually is what you want.
Thank you so much. No, I mean, that's so true. And again, just from my experience, again, you have to really intentionally think of every single part, because it really, you have to look again, your attrition rate, like why are people leaving? What's the feedback that they're giving you? And, to your point, just simply, blindly trying to hire, more diverse candidates. If you're not fixing maybe some institutional culture issues, is going to be pretty much done in vain. And so kind of in the same vein of Shari, I want to ask you, do you have, just maybe from your experience, any time where, you worked with an organization or just wish a founder or organization had maybe done something different, or felt that they may have, should have done, maybe would have, where you would have changed things in particular, especially when it comes to any of their diversity or inclusion efforts?
Yes. Short answer, but yes, I have. I've dealt with companies, and this is in all transparency. I think some companies generally want to do the right thing, and then other companies are just lazy, and that's just my personal professional opinion. And they're really easy to weed out, because when you first, this is going to take work. I think people need to understand that when you start talking about hiring diverse teams and underrepresented talent, it's not easy. It's going to take due diligence, it's going to take education, it's going to take getting uncomfortable, it's going to take real work that I think a lot of companies aren't willing to do, even though they say they are. And so a lot of companies are hyper focused on the end result where they want to be, but not the process it takes to get there. So I've definitely worked with companies who are just like, yeah, this is what we want. And then they're like, can you make it happen? And I'm like, yeah, like you have to do this, this, and this. And they're like, oh, like we didn't know we had to do all that. We were just kind of thinking we could just do, a little showcase real quick, get some people. And it's just like, it doesn't work like that, So I think I've definitely had my share. One particular experience I can think of is I consulted with a company who was looking to pipeline more diverse talent into their very white male organization. And their ultimate goal was obviously to change that. And they were like, yeah, we just want to do like a really big event, and we want to get like some Black people out there. I mean, this is verbatim, some Black people out there, some Latinos, get some people from the LGBTQ community, get them out. And I was just, you can imagine my face, right? And they were dead serious, and they had virtually unlimited budget, and this is what they wanted to do. And this was maybe, 2017? So this is very recent, and you see that a lot of times these organizations have these great budgets to make real change happen, because diversity is going to take money, power, and investment. It's great, nonprofit, charity, awesome. It's great, it's still meaningful, but at the end of the day, in order for us to make real change, it's going to take money, investment, and power. That's what it's going to take. And so this is, that was a really disappointing experience for me. And it really lit a fire for me personally, because I was like, wow, I can't believe like this company wants to just do like this really big, robust event with like Hollywood Reporter and Variety. It was really just about the glamour, to say they were doing something for diversity and they weren't willing to do the work. So that was a really pivotal point in time for me, which I still think about as I'm building pipelines, because in the spirit of transparency, I'm from Detroit. I grew up in a Black neighborhood. I went to a Black church, a Black school. There was hardly any diversity in my community. And my parents were blue collar government workers. And that was what I wanted to be. I didn't even know I was a creative till I was like in my mid 20s. And so a lot of what I pull from when I'm building pipelines, my own personal experience, because I know how it feels to be young talent, not having any access, any mentorship, no one coming to your Black school telling you that you can be a Black woman and work, leading or creating or innovating or be an entrepreneur. I didn't even know I was even equipped to be an entrepreneur until someone poured into me and gave me knowledge and mentored me and took the work. So this work that I do is very personal. That's, I say, personal and professionally, because I know, like I said, what it feels to grow up in a community with having no access or not knowing anything about what it means to lead a business or build a culture. And so saying that to say, it's going to take work on both the talent side, but it's especially going to take work as founders and as leaders, because it does start from the top. It doesn't stay at the top, but it does start at the top. And I think companies really have to shift, like I said before, perform cultural resets. And when I think about resets, I don't mean Band-Aids or just figuring out, oh, this didn't work, so let's just do this quick little, it's not a quick fix. That's not how diversity and inclusion works. And if we're really serious about making real, actual change, then we have to put in the work. It's gonna be hard. We have to have tough conversations. It's not about the politics. It's not about the money, okay? We don't wanna be, again, in 2050, having this same conversation. It's really gonna take all of us to commit, keyword commit, to doing the work.
That just so many, again, Jim shared there, and particularly I couldn't agree with you more. I want to acknowledge, we're going to actually quickly transition to Q&A, but before we do so, I'm curious from both of you guys, what are some resources when people are like, look, I want to do the work, I want to, really kind of better equip myself. I'll start with you, Shari. What are some resources for founders or leaders who have a hand in hiring and want to dive deeper into learning more about building diverse teams and connecting specifically to communities that support founders and businesses and building out more diverse companies?
I have many, but I'll just use my favorite three, and I'll also put this in the chat when I'm done talking. But obviously, pipelines. Pipelines is for companies in tech, entertainment, and creative, large and small, who are committed to making a long-term impact of pipelining more underrepresented talent into their company. So we are a mobile app and a desktop platform that, a la Tinder. I hate to use that example, but it's a swiping app where you're able to swipe through talent and view their profiles and connect directly with them through the app. And then on the foundation side, we also plug our company partners in as an accountability measure into workshops and mentorship programs. So they're not just paying us to post jobs, but they're actually talking about it and being about it and mentoring and supporting underrepresented talent, because development and training is important as well. So if you're interested in that, I'll put information in the chat. Also, two more are diversecreatives.com. I know it says creatives, but it's just such a robust network of creatives across tech, entertainment, and creatives. So it could be marketing, branding, et cetera, depending on what industry you're looking for. And then also One Sandbox, because we won't get into it today, but obviously hiring talent is one thing, but also your diverse suppliers are important also. Like, who are you sourcing from for your business is equally as important as the talent that's at your company. So One Sandbox is a wonderful aggregator of several different companies that are minority owned, specifically certified minority owned companies that you can connect with and learn from and support. So I will throw those in the chat. Those are 3 of my favorites.
Awesome, and so amazing to hear. And Jen, same thing. Any particular resources that you believe people should take away and really dive in and connect with?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the last few years, I've spent actually a ton of time and effort into creating a lot of content actually around this topic. So I know we have very limited time to talk about it, but I want to share some links. That's all about open sourcing, a lot of wisdom around this. So the first one is this guide to hiring called the Holloway Guide, which I'm a contributing author to. So I wrote these sections all about, definitions, standards, hiring tips, strategies. But my favorite section is probably, we called it the myths and pitfalls, where there's so many arguments against diversity and misunderstandings, misconceptions around diversity, like, but what about diversity of thought? Or like, why can't we just focus on gender? Like if I had $1 for every time I was asked these questions. So much so I actually just like wrote it all out, and it's available for all of you, both to educate yourself in case it's helpful, but also learn how to kind of address other people when they come with you at the same questions. So that's the first resource. It's available for free, so you can kind of like, get a cup of tea and like do an hour's reading, and I hope it'll be really helpful. The second one is Startup Bootcamp. So I mentioned this earlier, but because hiring is such a critical part of diversity, it's something that I'm so passionate about, and helping founders really get it right from the start. We've been, training founders, recruiters, hiring managers from really top startups like Figma, Webflow, Superhuman. Would love to have you join our next ones. And you should definitely put in your email to be notified for our 2021 dates, because as a preview for this group, we are raising our prices soon. But if you submit your email now, you can kind of lock in a cheaper price.
That is so amazing, and both of you guys just provided just amazing, resources that I hope that everyone takes a moment, if you haven't already, to dive in and make note of these resources. So right now, like I said, we are actually at our Q&A session, and as I indicated at the very beginning, if you're interested in asking a question, please use the raise hand feature, and then we'll go ahead and transition in, and you can unmute yourself once called upon. So first and foremost, Gayan Lufrano asked an amazing question during the talk, and so I'm going to give you the opportunity to ask the panelists your question.
Thank you. Sorry, I don't have my video on. But my question was around really small founding teams. So I work with a consulting company that works pretty exclusively with startups and very early stage companies. So I mean, we could be anywhere from 1 to 2 co-founders to a really small founding team. And because of that, they tend to have co-founders or other members of that team that are all people they knew or went to school with or worked with before, and basically look exactly like them and think exactly like them. So my question is, with teams like that, I find that it's, by the time they get to the point where they're thinking about diversity, it's really hard, because all the good leadership positions have been filled by somebody, one of them, we'll say. And I think it's been difficult to kind of, not even if they really want to, it's kind of hard to bring people into that environment, because we don't have any good examples of, of people of color or other people in leadership positions. And then on top, kind of beyond that, the positions that are left tend to be the not very exciting ones. So I'm kind of wondering if you all have any advice as to how teams like that, who actually do care about this, can sort of mitigate that issue of, we had to hire who we know, but how do we get beyond that when they want to?
Well, I'll just chime in really, really quick and say that when someone says we had to hire who we know, no, you don't. You don't have to hire who you know. I think, again, that's just something people feel like they have to. And I know some positions have quick turnarounds, but I'm just going to go back to my point of doing the work. And something that I would, there's so many different organizations out there, nonprofits, resources, et cetera, that you could collaborate with, support from, recruit from, partnering with HBCUs programs that they have, school. I mean, there are so many options. So when companies tell me, well, we had to, it's just like, no, you don't. Like you just have to do the work. And so, like, for example, if you want to hire more entrepreneurs of color, for example, then I would be reaching out to all of these incredible, which I'll also throw in the chat, entrepreneur, nonprofit organizations that focus on mentoring, developing our next generation of diverse entrepreneurs, and asking them, hey, we have these positions open. Can you send us some great candidates? They have alum that they work with, even if they focus on college or high school, they have graduating alum that graduate out of these programs and who are looking for work, but they don't have the opportunities. Or, like I said, HBCUs, historically Black colleges, universities, amazing schools who have great, robust business programs, marketing, advertising, whatever you're looking for. Hit them up and say, hey, we have these positions open. We're looking to recruit. So this goes back to being intentional. So if you really want and are committed to hiring more underrepresented talent into your companies, then there's so many organizations, schools, and resources out there that you can tap into, but it's going to require you doing the work. So that's just my little 2 cents.
No.
Well, I'll add that real fast. Plus one to Shari saying, like, I would kind of challenge the, we had to, right? So another way of phrasing that is like, we didn't want to take, let's say, like the time required to open up our pipeline. And I don't want to demonize kind of the, the companies asking that, because I do understand at the early stage level, you feel like you're moving at 100 miles per hour. The idea of like, like opening up the pipeline and like reaching out to these companies, like we just don't have time for that. I'm not saying like, every role has to be like this, like, in your mind, like a really tenuous process. However, this is how you're going to almost guarantee homogeneity on your team, right? Like we can always make excuses all day, like, oh, but like I had to hire this person, like, oh, but this person already was in the pipeline. I understand sometimes like that is literally what you need to do when you're so early stage that, it is hard to hire people that are not currently in your network. When you are such a small company, you're not established yet. I think that's why it's so important to focus on really the outcomes, the process, and not necessarily the outcomes. So even if you do end up hiring, let's say, a cisgender white man, someone from the majority group, tell me that you still were thoughtful about, defining the role, being intentional about what is this person going to be responsible for. Why are they called this leadership position and not this leveling? So if that happened and, that still led to a great hire, even if it's a white man, I'm like, great, that's fine. But the absence of those questions, this thoughtful conversation is what's going to lead to homogeneity. And, you're going to be missing out on talent because you're not working on that internal muscle. So I've written more about this in a blog post that I'm dropping in the link now, because it's really all about, well, if the founding team is not very diverse, how are we supposed to, build actually a diverse team? And I think that's why it's really important to focus on examine your biases wherever you are at, and really kind of, take this as a long-term approach, but also recognize that there is urgency and there is short-term impact to this work.
I just want to drop a really good line that I heard from Lily Zhang the other day in one of our meetings, and it was, you can either hire quickly or have diversity, and you can't do both. And that was, I think, a really eye-opening statement for our team, because everything that we've done thus far has been incredibly urgent, and legitimately so, but that 100% urgency is the enemy of diversity, I would say. So thank you for validating that too, Jennifer.
Thank you so much also for lifting that question. And thank you both, Shari and Jennifer, again, just for your great insights. And again, I agree, you can't do both. And, for myself, as Shari had lifted, like I'm a product of one of those organizations, one called Inroads, which specifically, was or is for underrepresented individuals and giving them, pathways into corporate America and so forth. And so, again, there's a lot of organizations, out there. For myself, I'll be dating myself, but I became a part of Inroads back in 1998. So that's quite some time ago. And so they're still around in other organizations like that. And Shari, I'm really grateful that you just shared an amazing resource, particularly related to HBCUs. I'm also a graduate of an HBCU. So again, there's a lot of resources out there. You just have to put in the work. So we now have reached the conclusion of today's session. I just want to extend an immense thank you to our amazing panelists, Shari, Holly, and Jennifer Kim. Again, I cannot thank you guys enough. As you guys know, check out our speakers section, look at their bios. You can connect to them on LinkedIn, as well as take a look and stay connected with their respective companies and organizations. Thank you everyone for attending your session on how to hire as a startup founder and best leverage diversity. I hope that you all have walked away with not only, some food for thought, but also an overall call to action towards just further amplifying and implementing diversity practices as part of your talent strategy as a founder. After this, we'll shortly transition into the 15-minute break beginning at 12:15 before the 12:30 session on the ecosystem builders, VCs, and corporates. Thank you again and enjoy the remainder of your time at the summit. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
The summit.